In Pakistan, the hijacking of Pan American Flight 73 comes to an end in gunfire and bloodshed.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. The hijacking of Pan Am Flight 73 is over, but the cost has been very high. Many passengers who were on board the plane are in shock. Many have been wounded in the final orgy of violence. And some passengers, plus two of the hijackers, have been killed. There is still such confusion in Pakistan tonight that no one is absolutely certain how many people are dead and wounded. In the reports from there tonight, the Associated Press is reporting that as many as 16 people have died. The Reuters news agency is saying 7. It appears to be clear from the overall tenor that there is more than a dozen people who are dead, and we do not know how many are wounded. Some people said a few, some people at an earlier stage said as many as 100. But we do not know at this point, nor does the administration, nor as best we can tell, do the Pakistanis. There were almost 400 people on board for those many, many hours, and it was late at night when the end began. Here's ABC's John McKenzie.
It was 10 o'clock at night in Karachi. The Pan American jet stood parked on the tarmac. Hundreds of heavily armed security forces moved to surround it. Doctors and ambulances waited nearby. Then suddenly, according to eyewitnesses, the hijackers opened fire, shooting passengers indiscriminately. The security forces stormed the plane. The shootout on the plane ended a day-long standoff on the tarmac as Pakistani officials talked to the hijackers. Pan Am Flight 73 originated in Bombay. It stopped in Karachi to refuel and was supposed to go on to Frankfurt and then New York. But here in Karachi, 4 men dressed in airport security uniforms and armed with automatic weapons and hand grenades stormed the plane as the last passengers were boarding.
The first bus had already gone and its passengers had already gone. Our bus went up to the part where we were supposed to embark on the plane, but they closed the doors and we saw an air hostess being taken at gunpoint, and we saw the crew who was jumping down.
2 airport workers were shot. Later, they described what they saw.
The time was about 5:45 or 6, and next to us was parked the airplane. The people were identifying their baggage, putting a cross on their baggage. Suddenly, we heard the firing from the Pan American side. I was grazed by a bullet, which hit me on the hip, and then I passed out, and I don't know what happened.
Suddenly, a bullet was shot from the American plane side, and the bullet hit my hand, and my fellow worker just pulled me away and took me away.
Just after the initial attack, the hijackers shot 1 passenger, a naturalized American of Indian descent named Rajesh Kumar. He was dumped in the tarmac, carried away on a stretcher, and later died in the hospital. Later, the hijackers said they were sorry about the killing.
And we saw a crew member jumping out of the plane window, and we saw him catching hold of a rope, and wo jump maa raha tha.
Alerted by the gunfire, the 3-man American flight crew left the cockpit through a hatch and slid down cables to safety. But the gunman demanded another flight crew. Pakistani officials said the gunman wanted to fly onto Cyprus to get several of their comrades released from prison there. They threatened to kill the passengers if they weren't given the pilots.
You see, it is very important to make sure that they are not nervous. It's very important to make sure that they are calm and they have trust in you. I believe that we have established that kind of rapport.
The question left tonight is how did the situation suddenly erupt into a bloodbath, and how the hijackers were able to penetrate security at an airport which even Americans said was very safe. Until today. John McKenzie, ABC News.
Well, we'll try to answer those last 2 questions in this broadcast. It was the middle of the night when the 747's auxiliary power, or APUs, basically ran out of energy. The sky was dark, and then the plane got dark. And that's when the panic began. Not long after it ended, we talked to one of the passengers, Darrell Piper of California.
They had been carrying around in their hands. First, they had 2 machine guns, they had a .45 pistol, and they had, I'm not sure how many, but 4 or 5 hand grenades. And suddenly, when the lights were going off, why, 2 hand grenades went off in the rear of the plane, and some machine gun fire was sounding in the front of the plane. And at that time, why, the man next to me hit the escape hatch chute, and the slide came down, and we slid out of the plane.
At least one eyewitness, Mr. Piper, has told the American consulate in Karachi that the hijackers opened fire point blank on people. Are you aware of that?
I'm sure that must have happened because there's an awful lot of passengers who were walking around in the terminal afterwards that had blood on them that was not their blood.
You must have been, if this is not too silly a thing to say, terrified for many minutes as the end came.
It happened too fast to be terrified. I was right there at the exit door, and suddenly it started swinging open. The slide came down, and there was no time to think. It was just go.
You seem very much together at the moment. How did your fellow passengers react to all this?
Those of us who are basically unscathed, why, we all feel pretty happy now.
Many others, of course, are not.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, brought to you by Kellogg's Special K.
This is a special Flight 73 Memorial edition of this program. You just heard a clip from ABC News on the evening of September 5th, 1986, when most Americans learned the terrifying news. Earlier that day, around 5:10 a.m. local time in Karachi, Pakistan, a Pan Am Boeing 747 named Clipper Empress of the Seas was hijacked by 4 armed Palestinian commandos on the ground during the boarding process, with almost 400 people on the aircraft. The flight originated in Bombay, India, now called Mumbai, and had a short stop scheduled in Karachi to pick up additional passengers, and was then scheduled to travel to Frankfurt, Germany, and then on to New York City, the final destination. A total of 20 people, including 2 Pan Am crew members and 18 passengers, were ultimately killed in this act of terrorism. The 4 hijackers were dressed as airport security guards and were armed with assault rifles, pistols, and hand grenades. The lead terrorist wore a plastic explosive suicide belt. The hijackers drove a van that had been modified to look like an airport security vehicle through a security checkpoint right up to one of the boarding stairways to the Pan Am jumbo jet. After the flight deck was informed of a hijacking in progress by the flight attendants, the captain, first officer, and flight engineer followed company safety procedures and were able to escape the plane using the cockpit emergency hatch, rappelling down to the ground and running to safety. At the time, this action was criticized by some. However, through a post-9/11 lens, their actions were absolutely the right thing to do, as the aircraft itself, loaded with jet fuel, could have become a devastating weapon of mass destruction. The hijackers killed 1 passenger and threw him off the plane during the tense hostage negotiations. Later, after over 16 tense hours inside the aircraft, the plane's energy depleted, plunging the cabin into darkness, and the hijackers opened fire, resulting in the death of 2 crew members and 18 passengers, with over 120 people injured. Let's take a listen to another clip from ABC News, when American television networks interrupted regularly scheduled programming to break the news. This news report features statements by Pan Am's Marty Shagru and White House spokesman Larry Speaks. The clip is about 4 minutes long.
There are a number of news conferences going on now as people try to unravel exactly what happened. We're waiting for Larry Speaks, for example, the White House spokesman. But at this moment in New York City, Martin Shagru, who is the vice chairman of Pan American, has been giving a news conference as well. And here's a portion of what he's had to say.
Failure of the aircraft APU after 17 hours of operation was the beginning of the end of the takeover. When the auxiliary power unit failed, the lights on the aircraft went out, as did the radio. Outside tarmac lights were turned on, but then failed. The hijackers apparently thought the darkness to be the start of an attack by security forces and began to herd the hostages into the center of the aircraft. This gave the cabin attendants a chance to open exit doors and inflate evacuation slides, beginning a swift exit from the aircraft in the dark amid gunfire and grenades thrown by the hijackers. Airport security forces attacked the aircraft when they saw the hostages begin to flee, capturing 2 of them and killing the other 2 while freeing the remaining hostages. Unfortunately, there were casualties among passengers and Pan Am staff. Our best information at this time is that there are 14 casualties, including the valiant Pan Am mechanic who maintained radio communication between the hijackers and the authorities throughout this long ordeal. We are deeply saddened and stunned at the senseless violence which has shattered the lives of innocent travelers today. Our hearts are extended to the families and loved ones of the victims of this atrocity.
Martin Shagru, who's the vice chairman of Pan American, again indicating to you in no small way how confusing things still are, because he says 4 hijackers, whereas the State Department says 5. I know a great many people want to know about their relatives who were traveling on board. Many of the Americans on board are of Indian origin and were traveling back from Bombay, where the flight originated. But if you are seeking information, you can call Washington, 202-647-6530. Here is the White House spokesman, Larry Speaks.
Colleagues, the hijacking of an Pan American Airways Flight 73 at Pakistan's Karachi International Airport was a cruel and sinister terrorist act. Our hearts are filled with sympathy for the families of those innocents killed and injured. The government of Pakistan acted boldly and decisively to bring this nightmare to an end, and we applaud Pakistan's exemplary resolve in handling this incident. Pan American Airways should also be commended for their cool and professional competence in helping to ensure this incident could be concluded where it started. The terrorists conducted a despicable and cowardly crime by threatening, assaulting, and murdering innocent passengers on a crowded airliner, men, women, young and old, with machine guns and hand grenades. Nothing can justify such barbarism. We can think of no punishment too severe for the criminals responsible. We are confident that those who perpetrated this brutal act will be brought to justice. We thank God this incident is now ended with the safe deliverance of most of those who had to endure the ordeal inflicted on them, and of all civilized society. The President and the First Lady express their condolences to the families of those killed and pray for the speedy recovery of those injured. We look forward to the safe and speedy reunion of the passengers with their families and loved ones.
This special report came to you from ABC News. We now resume our regular program schedule.
The 20 victims that lost their lives ranged in ages from 7 years old to 81. One of the Pan Am flight attendants, 22-year-old senior purser Neerja Bhanot, who died as a result of her injuries, was posthumously awarded India's highest civilian peacetime honor for bravery, the Ashoka Chakra, and became a revered national figure in India. 28-year-old Pan Am mechanic Meherjee Kharas was also killed by the terrorists. Both served their passengers with great honor and valor. For this special memorial edition of this program, we are joined by 4 Pan Am flight attendants that were on Flight 73 and were eyewitnesses to history. They also served their passengers with great courage and bravery and saved hundreds of lives. Our guests are Sunshine Vaisawala, Shireen Pavan, Madhvi Bahogana, and Samira Good. This is the first time that these 4 flight attendants talked about their events of September 5th, 1986 together. We caution that some of our listeners may find the graphic details and language in our interview to be disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Also, we understand that we are presenting a very long episode here, more than 2.5 hours. These 4 incredible women share their first-hand account of the terrorist attack, and their stories should be preserved for history. Before our interview, it is important and appropriate to say the names of each of the Pan Am crew members and passengers that were killed on that terrible day in September of 1986. Sunshine's husband, K.O.'s, will read the names.
We remember them. The Pan Am employees from India, Neerja Bhanot, Pan Am flight attendant and purser. From Pakistan, Meherjee, Minocher, Kharas, Pan Am mechanic. And the passengers from India, Trupti Dalal, Rupal Desai, Krishna Kumari Gade, Sitaram Krishnaswamy, Kodayatu K. Kurai, Bobby Thomachen Mulur, Thomachen Thomas Mulur, Aliema Skaria Nagaholi, Ramakant Nayak, Kuwarben Patel, Ganapati Kani Komani, Kala Singh, and from Pakistan, Syed Nasir Ahmad, Imran Rizvi. From Mexico, José Álvarez, Lamar Nuñez, Ricardo Muñoz Rosales, and passengers from the United States, Rajesh Kumar, and Surendra Manubhai Patel.
Now on to our interview. I would like to welcome all of you to this special program. I understand this is the first time that all four of you have spoken about Flight 73 together. Before we talk about what happened on September 5th, 1986, let's talk about why you wanted to become a flight attendant. So, Madhvi, why don't we start with you?
I wanted to become a flight attendant because I had graduated Culinary School of Management, which was directly relative to being out in the industry, service industry. So I felt it kind of connected. I wanted to be a flight attendant to see the world. I wanted to enjoy the privileges of the world. That was primarily the biggest reason I wanted to be a flight attendant.
Sunshine, how about you?
I wanted to be a flight attendant since the time I was a kid, and I don't know why. I just love the idea of flying. I love the idea of being in a plane, and I love the idea of seeing places. So even though I did a BCom and did everything the right way, in case I never got to being a flight attendant, it was my main goal. So at the time when I applied to Pan Am, I had applied to 4 or 5 airlines, and this one came first. Saudia came next. I took Pan Am.
And why did you choose Pan Am, Sunshine?
Well, my mother used to be in the travel industry, and Pan Am was the first one to offer me a job. But my mother used to be in the travel industry way, way back. And Pan Am was really a world-class airline. It was something to be proud of. It just had such a name out there that it just instilled a pride in flying for the airline.
Shireen, how about you?
Before Pan Am, I worked as a research assistant at a postgraduate university. While I was there, I definitely felt I wanted to travel internationally. And I thought the best way would be to join the airlines. So I applied for Pan Am at that time because I really did want to travel. I thought I would travel for a year, and then I'd come back to the field of research.
Samara.
Well, I always had a passion for travel. And so when I graduated from college, I kind of figured out that if I worked for an airline, I would get paid to do what I love to do. This was the first time Pan Am was hiring in Bombay. We all knew that it was a great international airline. So I applied, and I think they hired 85 flight attendants out of the 1,500 that applied, or something like that.
Yes,
10,500
applications.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think they hired 100.
Tell me about the training process and meeting each other for the first time.
So we were hired out of Bombay, and then we went for our training. We were sent to Miami, Florida, and to London after that. When we returned from London, we returned to Bombay, which was to be our base, our home base, and we were to fly out of there.
We had a 6-week training in Miami, which was great. It was a lot of fun. I don't think any of us were in the same batch. We only met after we started flying. So everyone came in stages. So 1 week after I flew out, I was the first batch which flew out on Boxing Day. I think a week or 2 weeks later, the next batch came, and so forth. I think there were 6 batches. And we had 6 weeks training. A lot of it was service, and we had 1 week of really intensive emergency training and took exams, learned everything we had to, went back to London to do an onboard. I forget what it was, but went to London for a week and then flew home. And at the end of it, and that soon after that, we started flying.
Yes, that time in London was when we actually got to do hands-on practice on a 747 because the airplanes were not flying at night. And so we used to go in the evening and practice service and emergency procedures on an actual 747.
That was the best time. It gave us all day to shop.
And was this your first opportunity to travel internationally?
For me, yes.
This is Madhvi. I just wanted to add to the training that, yes, I was in the first batch of training that went out. It was wonderful seeing, the training, experiencing the training. The ditching was the best part of the training. I'm sure it is for everybody who goes for training. Just the whole aura of Pan American, Eastern, it brought it all together. The training was pretty in-depth. And like everybody said, went to London.
Was this the first time that you were able to travel internationally to Miami?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it was my first international travel. It was overwhelming. First time I sat in first class, which is the seat that I got traveling to Miami all the way from Mumbai. So I had never experienced a first class seat, never experienced being on escalators once we landed, Miami airport. It was a whole world different. The excitement of somebody literally newborn. It was something like this because leaving your country. That was my experience.
Shireen, what was your experience?
For me, I had traveled domestically within India. So to travel internationally was great fun. When we arrived at Miami, it was really interesting. I was really impressed with the service training as well as the emergency training. I think it taught us all a lot. In our respective cohorts, we bonded well. Yes, it was exciting, as Madhvi says. And when we came back to India, we were ready and to start flying, and we were really a good team, I felt.
This is Sunshine here. I just have something to say about the training. We flew with Delta, and some people went to other airlines and some stuff like that. But I don't think the training compared to Pan Am training. It was so intense and it was so thorough. It really was excellent when it came to service, when it came to first aid, all of that. The flight service handbook that we had was so detailed. You could look up anything in that, and we carried it on every flight.
Samira, what was your experience like?
I really enjoyed it. My family loved to travel, so we always took off during summer vacations to different destinations in India. However, when I got hired with Pan Am, this was my first international travel. And yes, as Madhvi said, sitting in first class was a wonderful feeling. What was it? 6 weeks in Miami and 2 weeks in London was the longest I had ever been away from home. But we were all young. We were all pretty much fresh out of college, enthusiastic, and we enjoyed. Many of us bonded and made lasting friendships. We had great camaraderie. We helped each other. We had study groups in the evening where we would go over our procedures and help each other. So it was a great bonding experience.
Let's go to September 5th, 1986. How did the day start for each of you?
Can I go first? This is Sunshine.
Of course.
I was working in the back. So the airplane was all set. We had passengers getting on and stuff like that. And the mid-galley, I was doing the galley position. The mid-galley had, we had the older airplane, I forget the model. It didn't have the carts. It had those, you had to run every tray. And it had bev carts, but not the meal carts. But thank God, I mean, to be honest with you, if we had had carts there, there would have been 10 more people who would have been shot, because once the trays emptied out and were used, they could actually use the bottom part of that counter to hide it and get out of the aisle. It gave us more room in the aisles in between the labs and all that kind of stuff. But when I took one look at that, it was like, are they kidding? But it saved some lives.
Shireen, how did the day start off for you?
Well, I was working the aft galley, and I was outside of the aft galley. We were waiting for passengers to board. We were on the tarmac at Karachi, and we had the first two doors, the L1 and the L2 doors. The doors on the left were open with the air stairs coming up, and we were waiting for the last batch of passengers to board when we realized there was some trouble.
And Madhvi, how did the day start for you?
Hey, yeah, this is Madhvi. I was right up by the L2 door where the first set of hijackers came up. We literally saw them. Actually, didn't see them, hear them before we saw them. They came stomping up with their big boots on the steel, aluminum or steel stairwell that is attached to the door because we were not attached to a jetway. We heard this big banging noise coming up. They fired few shots up in the air. Samira and me will have pretty much the same kind of experience because we were both together on the same area of the airplane in L2. And the first initial reaction of me, and I think the couple of the flight attendants that were there in that area, was this is Pan American's way to see if we are vigilant, if we remember our training, if we practice our training skills. That was the first thing that came to my mind. And I think it was like an echo literally over there. So I was standing right by the door and I grabbed the phone and dialed the cockpit and said the code. And that was the very beginning of the day for me.
So this is Shireen. I just want to add to what Madhvi just said. Training really kicked in as soon as we saw what was happening. I was standing at the L4 door right next to the jump seat, and I saw when I looked up front towards the business class area, I saw at the Clipper section that a man had come in the security uniform, and he had pointed his gun at people and he was saying, hands up. And all our business class passengers were on their knees with their hands behind their heads or up in the air. And I knew straight away that something was wrong. So I crouched down behind the L4 jump seat and I picked it up and tried to get through to the cockpit. I couldn't get through. So I put the interphone back. I ran across the galley to the R4 jump seat. I sat down there with the interphone in my hand. I picked it up and I said, this is R4. There are men in the cabin with guns. And then I gave the code to say that a hijacking was taking place right then. And I didn't hear anyone speak initially. Initially, I heard somebody speak in an unintelligible American accent. I was really keen on just getting my message across, so I repeated it. And I knew that someone was on the line listening. I took a step back then because I saw one of the gunmen coming down the aisle with one of our pursers. So I took a step back and stood up, and I put my hands up slowly and pretended I had been standing there the whole time. I didn't want the hijackers to be angry at having seen me make a call.
This is Sunshine. Just a quick update on how I felt. Firstly, I was working the meal position at the back, not the galley. When the guys came up at L1, I was at L1, and they came running up. And they hadn't shot or done anything yet, but they grabbed one of the passengers, and I thought there was something wrong with the passenger. Maybe he was, so I went to peek and see what was, just being nosy. I thought one of the passengers were getting into trouble.
Samira, how did the day start for you?
So Flight 73 was going Bombay, transiting in Karachi to Frankfurt. So we're all on the ground in Karachi. I was having a cup of tea with Madhvi in the galley, waiting for the passengers from Karachi to board the airplane. We heard this ruckus outside and saw men dressed in security uniforms come running up the staircase with guns in their hands. And we thought, yes, there was a problem. We just didn't know what it was. But then they came on board and fired a round in the air, trying to get everybody's attention. And that's when we knew it was something more serious than just a passenger problem. They continued firing in the air. And then one of them went towards the back of the airplane, and another one went up the staircase towards the cockpit. And the other two started gathering all the remaining passengers, shooting in the air and bringing the first class passengers towards the center of the airplane and the ones from the back towards the center. So eventually we were all in the middle of the aircraft between, I think it would be the C and D zones. And they were still firing in the air and getting all the passengers together in one area. And that was the first time I understood the meaning of teeth chattering in fear, because I actually experienced my teeth chattering. And I was like, okay, it's instant fear when you're in a closed cabin and you have armed people shooting in the air.
To our listeners, just as a reminder, this is the first time that these four incredible women are talking about what happened on September 5th together. Let's talk about what was going through your minds when you saw these armed terrorists taking over the plane. Who would like to go first? I know Samira just talked a little bit about what she was feeling.
This is Madhvi. And like I said, I still felt under not shell-shocked at all. I just felt it was just Pan Am's way of checking to see if we are following our training. So I was operating a lot under that autopilot. What was trained to me was coming out. What they asked us to do was emoting. I don't feel personally, I did not feel fear at all. Just because I think I started with the first thought that it was just Pan Am's way. So, but by the time the reality of the hijacking set in, at that point, I feel I was able to then understand what was going on. And so I didn't go from not knowing to fear. It took gradual stages. That was for me. So I really did not feel the fear, but I was lucky that I was able to see it as a training propaganda.
Shireen.
I just wanted to say something. For me, I felt an extreme adrenaline rush at that point. There had been a Pan Am cleaner in the galley who said, "Hey, look, one of our security guards has caught a smuggler." And I looked up and I knew that even though the armed gunmen were in the dress code of the Pakistan ground security, I felt something was completely off. And as the others said, I went into training mode. And because of that adrenaline rush, I just felt I had to get my message across to the cockpit. There was no time for me to feel that fear at that point.
Sunshine, what was going through your mind when all of this was transpiring?
I realized right away that it was serious after they came up and grabbed Neerja. And I was a bit in shock for maybe a few seconds. And then after that, my way of dealing with stress is laughing it off. So I just, the first thought that went through my mind was, if this is how it's going to be, couldn't they be better looking? So I was just keeping myself cheerful and upbeat rather than, because it was either that or panic. I don't know, because everyone was in shock and nobody was reacting because we were waiting to see why these guys were on board. We were right up there at the door when they came rushing up. So we could interpret it either way. Maybe it was criminal or it was, So for me, it was like, oh God, did they have to be so awful looking?
So Madhvi and Shireen, you notified the cockpit. that there were hijackers on board. When did the four of you realize that the pilots were able to escape?
This is Shireen. So for me, we had been, after they took over the airplane and after the takeover phase, we had been asked to be seated with and have the window shades lowered. At that point, there was an announcement made for a cockpit, somebody who could operate the cockpit radio. And that's when I realized that there was no one in the cockpit, that the cockpit crew were dead. And that's what I thought, because I knew I had spoken to somebody. So at that particular point, I thought that they were dead.
Was there anyone upstairs, any crew members upstairs?
This is Madhvi. And yes, I just forgot. Who was upstairs? Was it Astrid?
Astrid.
Thank you. I thought, so yes, Astrid was upstairs. And going back to the other question that you asked, when did we get to know? Astrid then came down to the second, where I was with Samira and the rest, came down to the two doors. And she came down, and at that time, she said the cockpit closed the door. And I did not know, and I don't think anybody near me immediately knew until quite a bit, like few hours, I want to say, into the hijacking, that the pilots had left. And I love that what Shireen said. And like you said, we had first time talking. I never even thought of calculating the way Shireen just expressed that, hey, if they made that announcement, it is a clear indication there's nobody in the cockpit. Again, it could be attributed to the point of my thought processes at that time or the place that I was in my mental state. But I know Astrid was downstairs and she was with us because I was at two doors. And when you come down the upper deck, you're coming straight into the first. I was at one door, sorry. You will come straight down to the first class galley where we were. And so, no, I did not know, I think, few hours into the hijacking that we had no pilots.
This is Sunshine. I knew within the first, I would say, 15 minutes that the cockpit was gone, because when they came on board, after they grabbed hold of Neerja, and the lead hijacker called me to him, and he asked me what was up there. And I said, it's just, what's that? I said, it's upstairs. So he says, what's upstairs? I said, upstairs, like totally dumb. Like I was like acting totally dumb. So he said, you come with me. And he took me upstairs. And Astrid was there with the passengers, and she was just sitting. So when he realized there were people there, he said, who are these? I said, they're passengers. He said, get up. And he made them come down along with Astrid. Then he took me up again and he said, where's the cockpit? I said, I don't know. I'm not allowed to go into the cockpit. Where's the cockpit? I said, I don't know. So he comes up and he says, what's that door? And I said, that's the door. I don't know what's behind that. I'm not allowed in this part. I work in the back. So then he said, maybe it's the cockpit. I said, okay. And I knocked on the door and I kept yelling, Captain, Captain, are you there? Captain, Captain, are you there? Because I was hoping that they had escaped, because it's a matter of lives. At this point, everybody knew it was for real. And if I could give them a little time, if they were trying to escape, I wanted to give it to them. So I kept knocking, Captain, Captain, are you there? And finally pushed me aside and kicked the door. It took him all of 1 second. And the cockpit was empty. The escape hatch was open, and there were the inertia reels hanging on the outside. So I came in and I said, looks like they're not there. Everyone's gone. And he said, where are they? I said, I don't know. I've never been this part of the aircraft. And I stood in front one of the windows, because the inertia reels which were dangling down the side of the aircraft were outside the window. You could see them dangling outside the window inside the cockpit. So I stood to the side facing him and backing that, so I was blocking his view. He looked around. He didn't see the hatch open. He was too busy looking around. And there was a jump seat. There was a fire axe on the flight engineer's table. And at the back, there's a spare jump seat and a little niche where the cockpit crew would hang their jackets and stuff. So he asked me, "What's there? What's there?" And he pushed my head into that area with the gun. And I said, "Nothing, I can't see anything." And he hit my head hard with the gun and said, "Look in." And I didn't want to tell him I had a flashlight. In the end, I had to, because now I was nearly falling head first into this area. So I put the flashlight on and there was no one there. He came out and he took me down again. He still hadn't noticed the escape hatch. And I didn't know if they were halfway down, because it's a slow inertia reel as far as we were trained. So I didn't know if they were halfway down, went out again, came down again. And so I knew pretty much right away that they were gone.
And what was going through your mind? Were you happy they were gone?
Yes, I was extremely happy they were gone, because even though in my head I was trying to keep myself, cheerful and make jokes in my own mind and keep myself going, at the end of it, I knew that these guys were armed. They'd already shot into the air. They meant business. And if 3 lives were being saved, so be it. I was thankful. I didn't think of the bigger implications of being safer on ground than in the air. To me, it was a question of lives now. It was just lives.
And for our listeners, this is 1986, and there was some controversy over the flight crew and the pilots escaping. But in a post 9/11 world, in a post 9/11 lens, it puts a different light on this story, correct?
Yes, it does.
Yes, this is Samira. I don't remember exactly when I knew that the cockpit crew had left the airplane, but I do remember feeling very upset and very angry when I realized that, almost as though they had deserted us. We had a conversation. Our later trainings we had cockpit crew, we had pilots with us at certain parts of the training, where we were then able to understand their role in such incidents, and that their leaving the airplane was necessary to stop it from moving. Because if they had stayed on board, we could have been hopping all around the world.
Mm-hmm. Or worse.
Or worse.
They could have used the aircraft as a weapon that we unfortunately saw in 2001.
Exactly. But we had not been informed that in our training. So when I knew that the cockpit crew had left, I felt angry and deserted, because they're supposed to be the top of the chain of command on an airplane. So I think after this incident, that part was incorporated into our training programs, which helped later on.
This is Madhvi. Just wanted to echo on Samira's thought processes. I felt exactly like Samira. I felt deserted. I felt like, how are we going to take this through? Only because we had only flown for 6 months. We were all of 21 years of age. And who's going to tell us what to do, what not to do? That initially was the first reaction, thought process, and mindset, till, of course, justification. And I agree. And I wish at that time, even the rest, FBI and everybody else, would not wait for 9/11 to happen. In my world, I feel that the 73 was the precursor, of course, including the Lockerbie, that there was a thought process out there that could have created such major damage. And it was tested on 73, which was disabled, went through in Lockerbie, and we waited for 9/11 to happen. That just was my thought process attaching to Samira's.
This is Sunshine. I do remember, though, in training, we were told in case of an incident, we should try and hide our ID or try and get rid of our wings and jacket and anything that made us targeted as flight attendants. So I don't know if the pilot training was different or the same, but I would say that they would have probably have had to do the same thing. It's just, I don't know if their training was different. And of course, their training is different because it covers a lot that's different from what we do on a plane. But that's one thing I remember, is to try and keep a low profile and get rid of anything that identifies you as a flight attendant. Hide your IDs, get rid of the wings, take off your jacket, anything that denoted you as a flight attendant or a representative of the airline.
Shireen, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, for me, I remember the training where the emergency training, we specifically had hijack section or a portion of it about the about hijackings. And I recall Pan Am training was very good, and they also had this phrase: if escape is possible, take it. If release is possible, make it. So that was also part of the Pan Am training. And when I found that the cockpit crew had gone, and they were not, of course, dead, as I thought initially, I was actually happy that they had left the airplane and we were still on the ground and not somewhere up in the air.
So what happened next? So Sunshine, you were the first person to enter the cockpit and found it empty with the hijacker.
Yeah.
What reactions did the hijacker, what was his reactions when you opened the door and there was nobody in there?
He was shocked, surprised. He didn't know what to do. He expected everything to be in place for his scenario, and then he'd carry on with his plans. But it didn't quite work out that way. So he came down to consult with his first-hand guy, Ismail, and they were talking, and then he took me up again for the third time, and that's when he noticed the escape hatch was open, and he asked me what it was. And he found it hilarious. Oh, so what were they men? And I said, yes. And he said, and they ran away? And I said, looks like it. And he said, and he started laughing, thinking like, oh, you're a man and you ran away. And he made me close. So, but he didn't seem to know what to do after that. He was kind of lost till he regrouped and went on to bigger and better things.
So everybody that was upstairs came downstairs.
Yes.
Walk us through what happened next.
If I remember correctly, meanwhile, when I came back down, so there's gaps where I don't know what was happening downstairs because I was more mobile. And afterwards, Shireen was very mobile with him. So there's gaps where she wouldn't know what was happening downstairs because we, every time I came down, things had changed. People had been moved together. They had been moved together initially as soon as they came on board. Once people went down the right-hand side of the aisle, I was on the left. I moved to the right and then I went back to the left. So everyone had been moved back. They had brought the first class and business class, made them get up and move backwards, and kind of condensed everybody together from the back and the front into the center area. I went up to the cockpit again, this time after he figured out they were gone and stuff like that. All the passengers were brought down, and then later he brought some passengers up again. I don't know when, because I might have been in the cockpit or somewhere else. When he came down, he wanted to make announcements, or he wanted to make calls to his buddies. And I said, I don't know how to use the interphone. We only use it for announcements. We're not allowed to use it as a phone. So it's only for announcements. And I put him on the headphone, the crew phone, the phones at every jump seat, to make announcements to his buddies, to chat with them, because I was hoping someone would understand what he was saying. And if it's over the PA, well, then there was more, there's more chance of knowing what was happening. So he was communicating with the guys at the back. There were two in front, two at the back, and he was communicating over the interphone. And this went on for a while till he wanted to talk to someone on the ground. And that's when Viraf came into the picture. He wanted the bus moved away, and he didn't know how to get in touch with people on the ground. And there were no radios, no nothing. Of course, I didn't know how to use anything, according to them. And we found a megaphone, and Marianne had the megaphone, and he wanted to make announcements to, he said he spoke no English, first of all. He didn't understand English. And he would speak in broken English to me all the time and say, I want this to be announced. So Marianne was in shock. She was in shock for quite a while. So he'd tell me what he wanted. I would tell her what had to be said, and she would announce it over the PA, over the megaphone. And then he wanted to communicate with the ground. So he got me to open the L1, and Marianne to stand next to me with the megaphone, and he stood behind the two of us and called out asking for someone to talk to. And the bus was what started off was the vehicle that they had come on board in was still parked there, and the stairways at L2 was still attached. And he wanted them moved away, so Marianne had to announce that. I had to open the door. Marianne was next to me. He was behind us. He had the gun between both of us. She had to announce. They had to move the stairway, but what he saw was someone moving the vehicle away. And he started yelling, because that was hopefully their getaway vehicle if they had to. And he started yelling, getting Marianne to stop them. And Viraf was down at that point, and he says, we have to move it. There's a bomb in it. And they just kept rolling it away. And then he asked for someone to come and bring the stairways away from L2. So Viraf then said that I have to bring somebody to drive it away because it can't move on its own. So he allowed one person to come to L2 and drive the staircase away. And then he closed the door. He kept asking Viraf, he said, I want the captain. I want someone to fly the plane. If someone does not fly, all these announcements were made by Marianne in the same format with him behind us. If someone doesn't come on board to fly in 10 minutes, we'll shoot somebody. And it will go on every 10 minutes. So Viraf said it was also delaying him and saying they hurt themselves jumping off. They're not able to fly. We're trying to get somebody. Don't worry, it'll take a little while. Just be patient. Just wait. And he kept, so this went on for a good couple of hours with Viraf saying they're on their way. They're coming in from this country and they'll be here soon. And it was just delaying tactics, which went on for a few hours till Mustafa lost patience.
For our listeners, Sunshine is referring to Viraf Daroga, who was Pan Am's country director for Pakistan. His interview will be in part 2, the next episode.
Okay, yeah. I didn't know his exact position. I knew him as the tall, thin guy with spectacles. That's all I knew him about because I was normally working the back. And he'd come into the front and he'd come say hi to everybody, but he never really introduced himself as who he was. It was more like the tall, thin guy with specs is who I knew him as. I later got to know him.
The hijacker, when you were in the cockpit, got violent with you and hit you. After you came back down, were the hijackers violent with anyone else? How were they treating the passengers?
No, initially, which is something I forgot to mention, is he wasn't, I wouldn't say violent. He just kept knocking his gun against my head to show me he meant business. And it was more threatening than, in a way, it was violent, but not in a way where it wasn't violent. It was just, they were super amped up, and he just needed to make it clear that he meant business. But at one point of time, he sent me up. This was before we went into the cockpit, where we went upstairs, and when he saw Mustafa came down, sent me up with Ismail to get the passengers down. A lot of them were asleep, and there was this 14 or 16-year-old boy sitting, I think it was 9B. He was fast asleep. This guy kicked him so hard in the shin. It was full force, like he was kicking a soccer ball into a goal. It was so hard. This guy woke up screaming. And I said, he said, "What the hell?" And it had to have been so painful. It was straight on the shin with these guys' boots. And he was crouching over in pain. And I just told him, it's okay. I'm sorry. It's okay. Just be quiet. And that's when he got these guys, the passengers, down from upstairs. So that was very, very nasty and very violent, the way he treated that little boy. But Ismail was a real cockroach. I mean, he just was a nasty son of a bitch.
Shireen, is there anything you want to talk about? Where were you in the aircraft when this was going on?
So I was at the R4 door at the aft of the aircraft near the galley at the back. I was with two flight attendants that day, Marianne and Cecilia. And the flight attendant, Marianne, was called up front by the lead hijacker. He motioned with his gun for her to move up front early on in the morning. Those a few minutes after the hijacking, after the takeover phase. That left us seated at the back there. We were all asked with an announcement to be seated. So we all sat down on those of us who were in the aisles had to sit on the floor. And we stayed that way for some time. We were asked to lower the window shades. We stayed that way for, we were not allowed to go to the toilets or do anything for the first 4 hours, at least until about 10 o'clock in the morning that day. At that time, they allowed people to start using the mid-labs and the toilets. So I walked up front towards the mid-labs, asking the lead hijacker if I could also use the washrooms. And he motioned me and the other flight attendant to follow him and go up to the business class galley. Once we got to the galley, he said, "Start pouring drinks." So that's what we did. In the galley, in the business class Clipper galley, where we were pouring drinks, there were 5 flight attendants. There was flight attendant Neerja, the person Neerja, myself, Rani, and Marianne and Cecilia. So we poured drinks and we handed out sandwiches to the cabin. There were many people on the aisles, on the floor in the aisles and in their seats. And all the passengers had been brought into those 2 cabins between C and D zone. So it was really crowded in there. We poured the drinks and then handed them down into the aisles. Those who were standing at the end of C zone took the trays from us and handed it further back down the aisle. And so we managed to get the service done and make sure that everyone was fed and given a drink. After the service, I was going back to the economy section, and Mustafa, the lead hijacker, said, "No, you're going to come up front and sit in business class." The entire section of business class and first class was empty, except for the first 4 seats, the 2 rows on the left, near the L1 door, where there were myself and 3 other flight attendants seated in the first 2 rows. The only passenger who was there was passenger Mike Thexton. he sat on the floor at the L1 door at the base of the jump seat, at the L1 jump seat. He was sitting there in silence, and I really felt terrible for him because his was not an enviable position. While we were in the galley, Neerja had mentioned to me that one passenger had been shot, and the next passenger to be shot was seated at the L1 door, so I knew it was him.
This is Sunshine. At this point, after we had finished with speaking to the ground and stuff, Mustafa took me down the aisle, and he had gotten into a conversation with me about how he hated Israelis and Americans and stuff like that. So I got I knew then that those were his targets. And he started walking down the aisle, and he kept asking people, "Where are you from?" And they'd say, "India." I mean, most of us were from India. Some had American passports, some did not, but they were basically mainly Indian-looking people. So he kept asking every three or every second row or first row, "Where are you from?" "India, India." And he, at the point where people were on the floor, he stopped asking, and the first guy sitting down, who happened to be Kumar, he asked him, he said, "You get up." So Kumar got up. He said, "But I'm from India, I'm from India." He said, "I don't care." And he dragged him up front, and he put him at L1 in front of the door, and he Kumar, he was a young kid. I mean, he must have been the same age as us, or maybe a little younger. He was so young. And he kept, this guy kept begging for his life, and Mustafa told him to shut up and turn the gun on him. And then he was crying and stuff like that. And he kicked him, and he said, "What are you? Are you a man?" And he kept being really nasty with Kumar. And in the meanwhile, he made me open the door, and Marianne announced that if we don't get somebody here, we're going to shoot him. And Viraf said, "Oh, we will have somebody, blah, blah, blah," prolonged it a little bit. But after 2 or 3 times where they opened the door and closed the door, finally, Mustafa seemed to lose it. He grabbed Kumar. He put Marianne he made me sit down. He put Marianne in front of him and Kumar in front of him, put his arm around both of them and shot Kumar in the head, moved Marianne aside, kicked Kumar out the door, and flung the pistol on top of him, made Marianne close the door, and told me to keep a lookout. So I saw Kumar go down. I saw him fall. I saw the gun fall. I saw a huge amount of dark blood come out around Kumar's head. And Marianne just was in total shock. I was in shock. And he kept me looking out till he moved Marianne somewhere else. And then he had me open the door every 5 minutes or so to check if the body was still there. And he'd hold me in front, and he'd stand with his gun to my head, and I have to open it, peek, get back in. And after about, I think it was maybe about half an hour later, they took Kumar away. After that, he made us go down again. He made me go down again. I think it was Samira's bag lying in the first class or business class galley. I don't know. It was this biggish bag. There were 2 bags. I think one was Madhvi's, one was Samira's. And he said, take that bag. I said, it's not mine. I can't touch it. He just took it and he emptied it upside down. And I still remember when I was coming back, Samira, you said, hey, that's my bag. Anyway, so he made me go down and he said, I want get everyone's passports. So I'd already got I already knew that he was looking for American and Israeli. So I went down the aisle and I was picking, people had their passports out and whoever had it on them, some of them had it in carry-on bags. Some of them were just eager to please and were trying their best to look for it. So beyond a certain point, the angle they were at, he was at L1 and the other guy was at L2 with, I think at that point it was Lillian. I'm not sure, no, maybe Neerja. So after a certain point, he followed me till where the passengers were sitting in the aisle. And then he told me to go over and climb over them. So I kept climbing and collecting passports. And I could see out of the side of my eyes that he was watching me. So I kept collecting passports. And as I'd try and take all 3, 4 in the row so that if there was, I can't recognize American from British or European if they're white. I mean, so I try and get all the passports together so that I'd hold my hand out and everyone would put their passports in my hand. And I'd knock, as I was bringing it to the bag, I'd knock a few passports out, which were not Indian passports, and put in the bag. So I kept doing this all the way. And some people, when I reached them, they'd say, oh, it's in the overhead bin. And I'd say, don't worry about it. Just shut up. Just shh. And I'd just carry on because I want to get as few passports as I could, as few white people's passports as I could. And as, you know, just to lower the risk of these people being exposed. So, and I went all the way down and I had to cross over and come up on the right-hand side. And as I was coming up, he announced, he got Marianne to announce, Sunshine, come up front. And I was trying, but there's people all over the aisle. So I don't know if it was Samira or Madhvi who was at R3 and said, hey, that's my bag. And I'm like, and I just took the bag and went anyhow. So I was climbing over people and some people on the other side were trying to give me passports, but I just ignored it and kept going till I reached the front and we sat down. Meanwhile, he goes down the aisle and he brings another passenger up as hostage. And this guy actually, as he was walking, he asked to go to the washroom. And Mustafa said, okay, come on up front, come on. So this guy comes up and he puts him down at L1. And this guy says, the minute he sits down, he says, I'm an American. And I said, shut up. He does not like the Americans. So this guy kept quiet and he started, he was there begging and crying and stuff like that. And then he started praying in the Muslim way. And so Mustafa comes to him and said, what are you doing? He says, I'm praying. And Mustafa says, to who are you praying? This guy answers, to God. And Mustafa said, which God? And he said, there is only one God. And Mustafa smiled and sent him back. Then I had all the passports that I could gather with me at L1. And he said, give me the American passport. So I pulled out the American passports and I kept looking and I kept showing him. I said, look, they're all Indians. Look at the picture. They're all Indians. They're American passports, but they're all Indians. So he says, okay, give me the white. So that's when I found a few passports and I put it under my leg while I was sitting. First, I pushed it up my skirt. And then I knew I'd be going up the stairs pretty soon. So I managed to get it out from under my skirt, put it under my left thigh. And when he walked forward to talk to backward to talk to Ismail, I pulled up the seat, the Velcro seat, which we knew were life cushions at a pinch, and I shoved them there. And then he came back, and I was still looking, and I had them all open. I said, these are all Indian faces. They're all Indian. Meanwhile, I found another one, and he was standing right next to me, and I found two more. And I passed it, and I couldn't do much more because he was right next to me. So I nudged Marianne, who was sitting in 10A, and I passed it to her. And I think there was a demo kit on the side next to her, leaning against the fuselage. And she pushed it into the demo kit. And after that, he asked for, he went down the aisle again and he brought my text into the front. But prior to that, they had announced about radios and all kinds of things. They wanted communication with the ground because I didn't know how to use anything. I didn't know how to use the interphone. I could only use the intercom. I could only use the megaphone. So he went around looking for transistor radios. He got two, and he got me fiddling to search for a news channel because he wanted to hear all about his bravery, I presume. I couldn't get anything. And then he started asking Viraf for communication through, he needed better communication than the megaphone, and he needed someone to talk in Arabic. And finally, I don't have the timelines, but this was quite a few hours into it after Kumar had been shot, where Viraf said that we had a mechanic on board, and he could help communicate to the ground over the cockpit radio. So Kharas comes up front, and then Kharas and me were between the cockpit and down. So every time I came down, there was someone else. When Kumar was shot, Rani was there. I don't know when she came there. I went back up again, came down again between Kharas, me, and Mustafa were doing the march up and down. And there was Ismail sitting in the jump seat in the upper deck. And he had a grenade with which he pulled the pin out from the grenade, and he was lobbing it around and playing catch with it all through. Mustafa, Kharas, and me were in the cockpit. He was on the jump seat in the upper deck, and there were some passengers who had been brought back up. I don't know when, how, but the faces kept changing because, like I said, some of us were mobile, so we couldn't see what was happening if we left a spot. And then I got to serve passengers in the upper deck, and I poured drinks, did all that. Meanwhile, Mustafa and me were smoking together because he wanted smokes and he wanted my smokes. So every time he had a smoke, he would light 2 cigarettes, and I would have to have one and he'd have one. They were mine. And finally, I pointed out to him that this is American Chesterfield. Why are you smoking American cigarettes? And he turned his gun on me. It's like, but anyhow, through the day, he had raided the duty free. He had opened Marlboro. He was drinking beer. He was doing all these kinds of things. Meanwhile, I was serving passengers in the upper deck, and I think the passengers there were getting pretty comfortable because when I went around with a tray of Cokes, one said, "I don't want Coke, I want 7-Up." So that went on for a while, and towards the end of my time, my mobile time, he told me, we had lots of conversations where he wanted to take me away to Cyprus, and he wanted me to go wherever he went, and I was his friend and his buddy and all that stuff. And then he put me in first class to sleep, and I was there for a while. And I had this little Band-Aid. We always carried Band-Aids, the cockpit key, the can opener, a flashlight on our person. So I had little notes on the Band-Aid, what time this happened, what time that happened. I've lost it, and the names, but I did need to pull it out because I did not, the names and the accents were so different and I was going in and out of everything that I just had to make notes, because it was after Kumar was shot. It was nerve-wracking. It was nerve-wracking to put on a good face and be smiley and blah blah and be chatty all the time when you see such a young boy being killed in front of you. And I think after that, Shireen took over with Mustafa.
This is Samira. So when they finally allowed passengers to use the restrooms and get drinks, Madhvi and I were in the galley helping pour and pass out drinks. And yes, it's an interesting part of human perspective that's similar to what Sunshine experienced upstairs. We're passing out whatever we could get our hands on. And we actually had passengers asking for an alternate drink rather than taking whatever we could pass out at that point. And I remember Madhvi and I joking about it and saying, really? We're just about managing to get you a drink. But anyways, and then we were at the back of the airplane, and there were two hijackers sitting at the back of the airplane in either aisle. And I remember that as I was passing out drinks, one of them asked me to get him a beer. And then I walked back to the galley, and I knew I wasn't supposed to serve them alcohol. So then I walked back to him with a Sprite, and I said, there's no beer, we'll Sprite you. And he just gave me a disgusted look, but took it anyways. So they had two hijackers positioned at the end of D zone by each door. And then we just settled down and really settled down. Once we heard that gunshot and we knew that they had shot someone, there was a hushed silence in the entire cabin.
Samira, what was going through your mind when you heard the gunshot?
Well, to backtrack to feeling deserted by the cockpit crew, and then now having someone shot on the airplane, it was like, what's going to happen? Are we ever going to get out of this? And then I remember, since we were at the back of the plane, I remember Madhvi and I looking at the doors at L3 and L4 because they were in manual. We were on ground, so the doors had all been put into manual, and we were thinking about, if we do get a chance to get out, we have to remember to arm them so that the slides inflate. So we were kind of having these kind of conversations, trying to figure out what we could do. And that's, again, where the training kicks in, where you're looking at what you could possibly do when you have armed terrorists on board. But it was a long wait before anything else happened where we were. And I know that they were trying to contact the ground. And I think it was, 10, 15 hours later, when at sunset, the APU finally, the lights went off because we ran out of power.
This is Sunshine. There was one point when I remember seeing Samira, Madhvi at in the R3 area. Was it the R3 area? Y'all were the R3 area, but y'all were nearer to the galley, and there were a bunch of flight attendants right near the door, and I was coming up with the bag of passports, and I told them to pull the pin. You remember the emergency? You pull the pin, there's still a chance it'll inflate. And I was hoping to God someone would do that. But I don't know if nobody seemed to have got the chance. The other thing that was happening in the upper deck was Mustafa was, he got suspicious of all the sealed, we had the sealed alcohol because we were landing for every customs. We had to seal them and crack them only after takeoff and stuff like that. He cracked the seal and he found the beer, and whatever he drank, I had to take a sip first. It's a wonder I didn't walk around drunk and singing loudly, because I had to take a sip of every can he opened. It was mostly beer. And then he hit on the scotch, I think. So, and because when we we used the hard alcohol bottles, like the open cans of beer was tossed before we landed, but the half empty bottles were corked and put into the canister, and then we sealed it. So because they were half, he wants to make sure they weren't poisoned, and I wasn't giving him stuff that was poisoned. So everything he drank, I had to take a sip first.
Madhvi, where were you in the aircraft, and what was going through your mind?
So initially, right when when he started to push everybody back, I ended up in the aisle in business class, and I was seated in business class aisle. I do remember seeing Kumar stand up, go. I was towards the middle back of the business class aisle. I do remember seeing Kumar stand up. I do remember seeing go, but I didn't witness anything there. But I did hear the shots clearly. When I want to say Rani was on my side trying to collect passports, and she couldn't come through because we were all jammed up together. There was no space for her to move. So she passed me the bag and told me to get clear wherever I could get some passports around the area. And just like Sunshine said, I clearly remember somebody saying my passport is in the overhead bin. And I said, just let it be. Give us what you I was collecting only what people were giving me rather than allowing them to go up to the open the overhead bin. And then I passed the bag back to Rani. And when I was doing this, I had moved closer to the R3 door. When I gave the bag back to Rani, I was closer to the R3 door. The door was, of course, in the disarmed position. And we used to keep our books, our manuals in the jump seat. So I opened the manual, took out the instructions how to open the door, tore the page out of there. There was a passenger seated right across, and mind you, in R3 there were no hijackers. They were in front and the back, and so there was the ability. I was not being strong, brave. It was just my timing that we all had to play according to our time and ability. And so I had the ability to do that, pull that, give it to the passenger, and tell him that, if he got a chance to go through all that. Before that, while we were seated, I remember the passenger next to me, this lady who started crying and was breathing really hard, and she said she didn't fly Air India because Air India had a major emergency. She started to tell me stories about American Airlines that got hijacked for 14 days, and she thought Pan American was the safest airline, and she was going to United States for heart surgery, and she was obviously visibly distressed. I remember communicating with her, talking to her, and I'm just giving you a little bit of what was happening passenger-wise, their reaction over there. I remember her husband next to her. He was stoned. She was talking, but it was like she was talking through him. He was so stone dead. There was no emotion. I was 21. I didn't even know how to react to such a big thing of heart surgery and everything. And I was still, mind you, not in a fear mode at all. So I was very superbly positive almost to the end and after. So I just kept telling her that everything would be okay. I remember that. I remember by the R3 doors, the unaccompanied minors were there. And so trying to tell them everything would be okay, just stay down. I don't know if there was a row with all of them, because we had 13, 14 minors, I'm not sure. But I know that 4 of them were there, and I was able to speak to them. This was, again, just right before the jump seat. So going back to that passenger who I gave the paper to look through and told him if he had the opportunity to please make sure, he gets a chance to look through so he can open the door the way it's supposed to be. And eventually I believe that door was opened in the armed door, in the disarmed mode. But I also believe that passenger was the one that got shot in the eye, because this is again connecting with pictures. We are talking about 1986, no social media, no transparency, no flow through. And also, again, each one of us were dealing with the aftermath of the emotional distress in our own way, whether we were taking the highway of information or we were not. Times of India, which is the biggest newspaper in India at the time, whatever they were publishing was our way of learning and knowing. I do believe that passenger that I gave that piece of paper, at least I felt at that time I connected that way, had got shot in his eye when he tried to open the door or put it in arm. I'm sure. I'm not sure. Then I was with Samira, and I remember the lady next to me telling me that she had peed in her seat and she needed to use the bathroom and she didn't know what to do. And I ended up asking the aft hijacker, please, can I use the bathroom? And he did let me use the bathroom. And I said, there is another passenger behind me who would like to use the bathroom. And he allowed her to use the bathroom. And then that was the few of us that got started there. Then Samira and me helped take out the drinks while the people in the galley were pouring. And yes, of course, there were people that wanted choices of drinks. And we ended up serving the drinks and the sandwiches that were in the galley. We passed everything out. We did waters, and I don't believe there was any more food or drinks left, at least at that point, which we had finished. The passengers at that time, when we were going, were like a mix of relaxed, but I don't know what to do. And looking at us, literally each, whether it was Sunshine, whether it was Shireen, or whether it was Samira or me, looking at us, that what should we be doing next? And we are talking about 60-year-old people who are executives or CEOs or bigger phases in their life, while we were here just 6 months into the role. But at least some of us felt, and I think Samira and me felt like, we had to give them our energy. We had to give them that backing. And I think what we could do was create that aura in that little area that we covered, of making them feel that we've got this, everything is going to be okay. Whether we were laughing or whether we were saying, seriously, you want a choice of drink, take this one, because we don't know when we get a chance to serve the next one. And they were okay with that. And just trying to not lighten the situation, but just trying to give that impression that, hey, we got this, we are doing it, we've got your back, we've been trained enough, without saying all these many words, of course. And I do believe that the few of us that were right there, I know that between me and Samira, because we spent most of the day time, and when we evacuated together at the same time, that our primary goal at that time, we took that to become our primary goal, to be like the support team, to be like there for the passengers that would not turn up to be heroes, would not turn up to be somebody that I can take charge, or get the impression that these are young flight attendants. Look at them. They don't look, barely, we were 21, but we may have looked 17 and 18 years old, because that's just the way we were. And not to give them that impression that, hey, they don't know what they're doing, and our lives are at stake, and let's go out there. Let any passenger thinking like this, let's go out there and let's take control of the situation. I feel those of us that were there, that were doing what we could do outside of Mustafa and Ismail's or anybody else's area, we did the best we could in trying to keep that peace and calm and sustain, because clearly nothing happens with one person. No one crew member can serve the whole 747. And I think all of us played our little role and did what we did. So that was my role up to the point. Of course, to the end, we'll talk when you're ready for it. Thank you, Shireen.
I have just one thing to add. I'm not... I got a letter from this guy called Richard Melhart. And
oh, I know him.
He was actually at R3, and he was a Vietnam War vet. And he wrote a letter to me after the incident, just thanking me for whatever. And he had said that he was the one, he had opened the R3 door. He had to kind of leap over a bunch of flight attendants and get the door open. So that's what I heard from him. But like, this is, like I said, I wasn't there, and that's what I had heard. And when I met him in Washington too, that came up when we went for the criminal trial for Mustafa. I met him there, and we got chatting, and so just throwing it out there. I wasn't there. I don't know who did what where I wasn't, but this is just what I heard.
Yes. So to add to that, that's why I said the passenger got shot. So of course, I don't know if the passenger who got shot, who I gave the paperwork to, the R3 door information. I know Mr. Melhart. I'm in contact with him, and he may have been the one that opened eventually. But I was just trying to portray the scenario of the fact that that's what the passengers did, and maybe he took this passenger may not have sat with the paper in his hand. He may have passed it around, and I did tell them, and I actually put it in the Clipper magazine. When I gave it, I didn't give it like the piece of paper. I put it in the magazine, and I told them that, hey, take this, pass it around. Who can get to the door first? That is the way we open the door here. So yes, it could have been, and that could have totally been the scenario. And this person must have tried first and got shot in the eye, because I know clearly. I remember seeing and feeling, and coming back to saying, "Oh my God, he got shot because of me." That was right then, of course. So yeah, it's awesome.
Yes, this is Samira. So since we're talking about that time, I don't know, Tom, if you're ready to go there, but like Madhvi said, at that point when they started shooting, we had the unaccompanied minors with us, and to protect them, we tried to put them between the toilets at L3 and R3. There were two sets of toilets, so we tried to get all the unaccompanied minors in between those toilets so that they would be safe. And that's why we were not by the door, because we're trying to get the unaccompanied minors out of the shooting range. And then whoever opened the L3 door opened it in manual. And I know that a flight attendant opened the L4 door, and therefore
R4.
They put it, the R4, I'm sorry, R3 and R4 opened. And so a flight attendant opened the R4 door and therefore put it in armed. And so we had a slight inflate at R4, but R3, everyone started jumping onto the wing, and then from the wing of the 747 down to the ground, which is about 18 feet. And it was dark outside. We didn't know what was outside, but we knew that we were being fired upon from four ends. And so we had to get out.
Shireen?
Yes. So I'm going to backtrack a bit and go back to the morning where we just finished pouring drinks at the business class galley and handing it out into the cabin. One thing that struck me at that time was that the passengers were really calm. They were quiet, and they did as they were told. No one was acting out or causing any confusion. That was really good, because I think if there were some people who had reacted badly, perhaps things could have ended worse. But after pouring out the drinks and handing out the sandwiches in the business class galley, I was asked to go and sit up front in business class with 3 other flight attendants. The 3 other flight attendants and myself, we sat there at the forward section of business class with the next passenger who had been selected to be shot. He was seated down by the L1 jump seat on the floor by the L1 door. And the person who was monitoring us, the hijacker was seated on the aft most seat of first class with his gun trained at us on row 5. So he had his gun trained on the 4 of us and Mike Thexton. So at this point, what had happened was it was quite quiet. If it was Ismail who was seated there, we would be allowed to make conversation. If it was Mustafa who was there, we were allowed to converse. But if it was Ismail, he would say no talking. Anyway, we sat like that, and suddenly the smoke alarm went off, and it was really loud.
Oh, yeah.
And at this point, what happened was Mustafa got really upset. He picked up his gun, stood up, and pointed it at us and said, "What's happening? What's happening?" So I stood up. I said, "Don't worry, be calm. The smoke alarm has gone off in the business class lab. I can go and check." So he came with me. He put his gun to my side, and I knocked on the door and tried to get the door to open. Since it didn't open, I did what flight attendants can do and do very rarely. I opened the door in the manual mode and forcibly opened the door and pulled the door open. When I pulled it open, I saw there was another hijacker who was seated in the toilet, and he immediately put his handgun up and held it to my forehead. So at this point, I had one gun at my forehead and one gun from Mustafa based on pointing into my side. So at that point, I just said very calmly, "You're smoking and you've set off the smoke alarm. Stop smoking." And so he, for a moment, he hesitated for the longest moment. At least to me, it seemed like the longest moment ever. And then he slowly lowered the gun. And I took a step in and tried to disengage the smoke alarm, which was on the ceiling. Once this beeping had stopped, I slowly took a step back. And the minute I took a step back and away from the door, he slammed the door shut. Then I was allowed to go back and be seated again in the first two rows. So this was a pretty scary experience for me, having a gun face at my forehead and at my side. And I was thinking, as Sunshine said earlier, you try to use certain humorous sort of phrases in your mind, or you try to think of the situation as somewhat comical. And I was thinking, wow, it could have gone the other way. I could have been shot for trying to enforce smoking rules on the airplane. And my family would have received me in a body bag, because I embarrassed a terrorist on the toilet while he was seated there. Anyway, that incident was over. And then soon after that, Mustafa came down with Sunshine from the upper deck, and he asked her to sit in seat 4B, which was in first class, the second last row in first class. And he pointed to me and with his gun, and he said, "You're coming upstairs with me." So I went up the staircase to the upper deck and the cockpit area, and that's where I remained for the afternoon and the rest of the day. When we got upstairs, I looked into business class, and I noticed that Kharas was seated in the first row on the right-hand side in 7J, and he sat down on the little ledge next to me. After that, every time there was communication from inside the cockpit, we would move inside the cockpit to make contact with the ground staff. Every time, and the tower. Every time we moved in, Kharas would go in first. I would follow. When I would go next, Mustafa would stand behind me with his arm around my neck and shoulders in a neck brace from behind, and the gun would either be at my side or at my head. He carried a semi-automatic weapon, and I was told that that automatic weapon could fire as many as 600 shots in one round. Anyway, we walked into the cockpit each time there was communications from the tower, and he did this using me as a shield in front of him, and I guessed that he was trying to make sure that snipers from the outside couldn't shoot him, and if there was shots fired, it would be me that got hit. When we walked into the cockpit, Kharas would always sit on the right-hand side in the first officer's seat, and I would sit in the captain's seat on the left-hand side. Mustafa would sit in the chair behind the captain's seat, that is behind me, And of course, again, that meant snipers from outside could not get a direct shot at him. We sat that way every time there was communication from the tower. I would hand the hot mic to Mustafa. He would put his hand over mine and speak to the tower. He spoke in a language I didn't understand, and I guess it was Arabic. This happened a few times. And then when we exited the cockpit, he always exited in the same way with me in the front, and he would back out of the cockpit so that he was not in any direct line of fire from the snipers. So he also, when we went outside, he would be seated. He would raise the window at the side of 6A and he would say, "Look out, what do you see?" And I was like, "I don't see anything. What are you looking for?" And he said, "Well, I'm looking for American fighter jets." And so he would hold my head to the window and look along with me, and just to check and make sure. When we were in the cockpit as well, he would do the same thing. He would ask me to look from the windshield of the cockpit down at the tarmac and said, "Do you see anybody? Is there anyone there?" And sometimes he would put his face alongside mine and take a look down at the tarmac. And I always said there was no one there, and there wasn't. And he would ask Kharas on his side to have a look as well. There were times when we sat in the cabin and he just made conversation. I tried to get him to be calm, converse about things that were just normal conversation. We had been taught in the Pan Am training to specifically watch out for Stockholm syndrome, which is what I was doing. Stockholm syndrome, of course, is where where the hostage takes on the hijacker's cause as their own. I was watching to see that I was not in any way sympathetic to him. He talked a lot about all kinds of things. He asked to go dancing in Bombay. He asked me, "What's the best nightclub there?" So I said at the time it was a place called Studio 29. So he insisted he wanted to go dancing at Studio 29. He also said, "Come to Cyprus and I'll take good care of you." And I was, "Oh no, not really. I don't really want to go to Cyprus." And so this kind of conversation was going on. He also said he was fighting for his home, that he wanted to make sure that he went to Cyprus to meet his friend and go ahead with his cause. There were times that he was angry, but for the most part of the afternoon and the evening, he was quite calm. So for the first few times we went into the cockpit, he used a little bit of force and he was a bit rough, but once he saw that I wasn't resisting and I was just calm and my body was relaxed, I mean, he didn't use any unnecessary pressure or force. While sitting there, I didn't really believe any of the things that he was saying about himself and his personal life. He also, I noticed, wore a white belt around his waist. He was without a shirt and it was very visible. So I said, "What is that?" I guessed it was an explosive device. And he said, and I didn't want to ask him, "Is it an explosive device?" So I just said, "What is it?" And he said, "Oh, this has been given to me by my mother to prevent me from being in any pain." So I remember at that time, again, using humor to think, wow, if this is an explosive device, I'm surely not going home today because I'm sitting so very close, within a couple of feet from this person. And later found out, of course, that there was enough explosive that was enough to blow up the entire airplane.
I just want to add one thing to the point where after he shot Kumar, he was so angry. It wasn't fun to see. He kept walking up and down. "Fuck them, fuck them. They made me do it. They made me do it." And he was so angry that it was very hard to, like, I knew to shut my mouth and sit till he was ready to talk to me again, because he was in a total overreacted state, and he was furious, absolutely furious. And the same thing he did with Shireen. Every time he heard noises outside, I had to look. And good thing I like planes because I could identify there's a PIA going, there's British Airways, there's this going, that going, because he was looking for something. I didn't ask him for what he was looking for like you did, Shireen. But I don't know what I didn't know what he was looking for, but if anyone had to do the look out the window, it was someone else besides him. It was always someone else besides him. He was the biggest coward of them all, honestly.
So after 16 hours of being on this aircraft, do we want to talk about what happened after the APU went out?
The emergency lights came on, and we went into the cockpit together. As usual, Kharas went first, and Mustafa and I followed later, after him, closely behind him. And Kharas explained very clearly to Mustafa. He said, the APU at the rear of the airplane is down. Once the batteries are down, there will not be any power to this airplane. You will not be able to take off again. And the airplane will be in complete darkness soon. You have 15 to 30 minutes before the lights fail completely. So Mustafa said, try and restore the lights. So Kharas went to the flight engineer's table, and he tried pushing buttons there on the top on the left-hand side, and he tried different things. And he said, I don't seem to be able to do anything. And then Mustafa that was the only time when he didn't use me as a human shield, because what had happened was when the emergency lights came on, there were no proper lights in the cockpit except for one very large circular light above the first officer's seat on the right-hand side. So he made me hold the paper up to the ceiling to cover the light so that there was not enough light to illuminate the cabin clearly. He did this because, again, I felt he didn't want snipers outside to be able to get a clear shot of him and see what was happening inside the cockpit at that point in time. Kharas continued to try to restore the lights. Later, I was told that the snipers did take 2 shots at the windscreen of the cockpit. I, however, did not hear or see anything. And we then, when Kharas said, I cannot restore the lights, he led us down into the main deck. Just before we exited, he had asked Ismail to take the upper deck passengers down, and they had gone ahead of us. So when Mustafa said, let's go, there was nobody in the upper deck. We made our way down the stairwell. I noticed all the passengers were there, even though the cabin was really dimly lit. It was hot and quite quiet. In a few moments, he asked me to come forward and make an announcement using the megaphone. So I stood up from where I was seated, moved past Kharas, picked up the megaphone, made the announcement, and I said I said exactly what he told me to say. He said, tell the passengers that we are trying to restore the lights. We are asking the manager outside if he can restore the lights for us. And I made the announcement, told everybody they were not to move, they were to be quiet, they were to be seated in their places. And then I put the megaphone away, and I was going to sit down again as the second person on the floor in that aisle. And he said, no, you sit in front of Kharas. So I was the first person on the floor in the aisle, and Kharas was behind me. When I looked behind, I saw there was a passenger behind Kharas, and behind Kharas was Neerja, the purser. At this point, the airplane was dark. It was there was a lady seated in the aisle of row of seats next to me, and she said in Urdu or in Hindi, "They are going to kill us now, aren't they? They're going to murder us." And I just reached in across the aisle and I patted her arm and I said, no, we're going to be okay. You know, I was calming her down. Little did I realize just how disastrously things would move in the wrong direction over in the next couple of minutes. So at that point, there were 4 hijackers, 2 at the forward section facing the cabin forward into C zone, and 2 were at the aft section facing forward from facing the nose of the plane. They were standing in the rear section next to at the back of D zone. Before the firing started, anybody else wants to say something?
Yes, this is Samira. So just before what you narrated, Mustafa had come to the back of the airplane and he had taken off his shirt at this point. And Madhuri and I nicknamed him Rambo because he was walking around with this rifle slung on his shoulder and that ammunition belt was showing, and he'd taken off his shirt and he was walking up and down the cabin. And I think what he was doing is coming to the back to communicate to the 2 hijackers at the back to be ready for the next phase. And then when the lights went off, they pushed us all, like we were all seated in seats at that point, but then they got everybody into the aisles and squished between C and D zones again. And that's when we took the unaccompanied minors and we tried to squish them between the labs in between.
So by the time I got there, obviously then everybody was, or he had already told them to, the other hijackers, to get everybody seated on the floor and in the aisles within a smaller, more compact area.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm just going to back up on Samira right away because our experiences are pretty similar since we were together at the same time. When he started to push everybody, it almost felt like compressing everybody into one body out of 100 bodies. And we were all literally stuck to each other. We put the unaccompanied minors, there were people around that were crying because they knew, everybody got the sense, everybody at that point had the sense that this was nearing to the end or the end literally. So we were sitting over there, passengers were crying, other flight attendants that were around us, Samira and me were in the trees by the 3 doors on the left side and left side, right, Samira? On the left, on the L3 doors, and we were in the aisles while the kids were all squished up between the labs. But passengers, just to tell you about how they were feeling at that time, they were super anxious, crying. Literally, you could hear prayers, you could hear people like saying things, mumbling, jumbling. There was a lady sitting in front of me who said, "I have 3 kids, I can only shield 2, please somebody can help." In literally, both Samira and me were sitting there, we took the child's, I remember definitely putting my leg or hand on top of that child and just getting into a fetal position as much as we could because we literally had 2 inches of space for each of us to be squished over there. And that was literally all that. And then of course we heard the prayers going through the cabin before the doors got opened by somebody who was closer to the door. We were close to the door, but not close enough because even though we were like maybe 1 foot away from the door, but there were like 15 people in that 1 foot space. We were just cramped, like not even, I don't even know, sardines also doesn't seem like a perfect description. But so that was what was happening in the L3 doors between, the other flight attendants getting nervous and crying and listening to everybody's cries. It was definitely one of those scenes that stuck to my memory because it was the closest that we all knew. We didn't know how many of us would get out of there. And then, of course, we'll go to the next part whenever. So go, Sunshine. Thank you for letting me speak.
I was still in first class at this point, and before well, Ismail woke me up. He hated me. So he knocked the gun hard against my head and told me to get up. And he kept pushing me with his gun to walk down the aisle. So I kept going and he kept pushing me. And then he made me sit right in the front. I was like right there. And I saw Neerja. There was one person and then there was Neerja behind me. And well, then Mustafa came down and he saw me. This was before Shireen and Kharas came down. He came down for, I don't know why. He came down and he saw me sitting there and he told me to get up and go behind. So I climbed over the first person and he says, no, more behind. So I went past Neerja and he said, no, more. And then at that point, maybe after 2 or 3 people behind Neerja, he said, okay, sit. So I sat there and I was facing the front and then he disappeared. Ismail was in front there. And then I saw him come back down, someone come back down because it was pretty dim by then with Shireen and Kharas. And we were all like Madhvi and Samira and everyone said at this point, we were squished together like you couldn't even bend your head. Like whichever position we were in, that's where we were. We couldn't move. You couldn't move a finger. You couldn't move an arm. You couldn't move a thing. We were just stuck together like glue. And then they came down and after the announcements and everything, the emergency lights started flickering and they took up position. And then then they just shot. Passengers were on my side, on the left side, they were silent, pretty much silent. Everyone was frozen. Everyone was scared. There was, while we were sitting there, one child asked for water. I reached in and got her water, but those things squeaked so loudly, I couldn't get her anymore. And we were just there. We just couldn't do much. The people were, you couldn't move. You just could not move.
So the hijackers started firing into the cabin.
Yeah.
They set themselves up, 2 at the front of C zone and 2 at the aft of the airplane with all the passengers in between them in the seats and in the aisles on the floor. And then they let out a war cry, what sounded like a loud war cry, and then they just started firing. And I was seated, the first person in the aisle in front of the hijacker, Ismail. And when I looked up from where I was seated on the ground, a few feet away from him, I saw his gun being fired. I saw streaks of light and fire spraying forth from his gun. And he started from the back of the cabin, moving his semi-automatic weapon from left to right and left to right again. And by the time he reached forward, I had moved out of the aisle between 2 rows of seats. The lady who had said, well, they're going to kill us now, she just grabbed onto my head and pulled me down and kept me down right at the bottom there. And I pulled my legs in out of the aisle and stayed there. The firing seemed to go on for what seemed like a really long time. But it was probably no more than maybe a minute or so. And
Shireen, you saw the mechanic Kharas killed, correct?
That is correct. He stood. When the firing stopped, I got up very slowly and I looked around. It was terrible at that time because from silence there was now screams of pain and cries of agony through the cabin. People were saying, "Where is my loved one?" They were calling out their names and there were cries of pain throughout. And when I stood up, a minute later, I looked down and I saw that my co-worker had been shot, and I knew just by looking at him that he was no more.
And Sunshine, you saw Neerja shot, correct?
I didn't see her shot. I came back in after the fact and I found her there. But when the shooting, just before the shooting started, and when they yelled, whatever they yelled, to me it sounded like kill, because that's what I imagined they were going to be saying. And when they started shooting into the crowd, the passengers, it was like howling. It was awful. It was like a bunch of dogs howling. It was the worst sound. And then I looked up and I saw flashes of light on the left and the right side. And unfortunately for the person in front of me, she got shot in the head and she fell backwards on top of me. So, and then in a little bit, there was space because someone had opened the door on the other side and people had started running. The lady in front of me had gotten shot in the back of her head. So I had a whole bunch of matter all over my chest and blood and brains, and it was awful. It was awful. The screaming, the yelling, trying to get people to... I didn't do anything at that point because people were moving, so you can't control a mob. I let them go wherever they were going, and I just waited to see what I could do after.
And Madhi?
Yes.
What happened from your perspective?
So we were by the L3 door, and when they finished what they were saying, communicating with each other, the hijackers, they started the firing. I did not put my head up at the point where I saw the gun flashes. But when I put my head up, all I could see is the fluff from the seat just going like snow. And it seemed like there were stones flying. There were just bullets ricocheting from the fuselage. People were screaming, yelling. I literally could see where I was in my little area. People were trying to stand. And of course, that was the worst thing to do. I did not see anybody dead or dying in the area we were. And I think what got us lucky for us was the door got opened immediately because we were sitting so close to the door. But again, to back what Shireen and Sunshine said, the moaning, the groaning, the agony, that was so piercing. That was simply so piercing. It could tear your heart apart. And then if there's anything else there to tear, it would tear that even furthermore. It just felt like it was shredding your insides. And for us, it was only a brief moment. I'm assuming for Shireen and Sunshine and other flight attendants who were there longer, their witness was so much more longer of that pain and agony. But that 1 second dose of that experience and that witness was enough to crunch your whole mind and brains out of shape. So that part of that was the only one time that I was afraid in the hijacking, and that was one part that stuck with me forever, has stuck with me forever. And I think that pain and agony was simply too much. So till that airplane door was opened, and even before I could react, before I could do anything, I was simply pushed out into the onto the wings by the passengers who were trying to exit. At this point, everybody was just exiting, screaming, yelling. At a later date, I did meet a passenger who said, "Oh, I was next to you when the evacuation began at the 3 doors. And now I was married at that time, and now I'm divorced." And I asked her what happened. And she said, when those doors opened, my husband ran out and I called out to him. He made eye contact with me. I asked him to help me. We were married 18 years and he still ran out without me. She said, I saw his eyes the last thing before I jumped out of the airplane. And so just to tell you how things this was one story I got to know because of we continue to fly. And so we were just I was thrown out onto the wing. And again, no choice again at that point, because everybody was just pushing. If you did not jump on your own, you would be pushed. When you jump on your own, I'm thinking now that I've learned what I did is at least you have control in when you land, even though you don't know where you're landing because it's pitch dark, black tarmac, late night. You don't know when to pull yourself back to hold for the impact of landing on the ground. I jumped off the airplane, broke my leg and my back, and I had partial, I forget the name, spinal injury, and broke my ankle. And then after that, we were like ants scattering, just running on the tarmac and didn't know where to go. There was nobody to give us any guidance of where to go, what to do. I remember initially running, and Samira and me got separated. Initially running and hiding in one of those luggage compartments that you have, which you use to store luggage in the airplane. I ran in, pulled the curtain, but then again, I could hear the noises, voices, people running, calling. I thought, what if nobody knows that I'm here? So I came out, started running with everybody, and nobody knew which direction to run. So I just followed one group of people that went towards a little, it looked like a house or a tower or part of a control room. So we ran into the control room, and it had the lights on. And there were security guards with guns standing there. And they told us, get in there. And then they ran away from there and they left us, or they went away from there. I don't know whether they went to help or what they went to do. I don't know. But they left us, few passengers there, pushed us in, and we were left in that room. And the few of us that were there, we locked ourselves in a bathroom, which was like a horrible little tiny bathroom. There were 9 or 10 of us. I don't know how many. And then we were there for a few seconds. And then when the guards came back to bang, I remember clearly the men, instead of opening or doing anything, I remember them putting me in the front. So they put me in the front and they said, you open the door, because they were afraid that, it's the hijackers who have come and are trying to still get us. We had to so it was really the guards that came in. They let us out. They told us to climb a 5-foot wall, jump over the wall, get into the main building where the rest of the passengers were. So we had to get to the rest of the building. While we were running, one ambulance hurt somebody. I don't know how that chain of events happened, but I think they pushed this person down or banged into the person because they were running. The ambulance was coming through. We were running and we were still fearfully running. And we ended up in the main building. So, and then after that, we went to the hospital. But so that's still where my story was.
Samira, do you want to tell us what happened from your perspective?
So when they started shooting, I remember being between the labs with the two unaccompanied minors. And when I remember the dimly lit cabin, I remember smoke, fumes, screams. And I remember myself screaming, open the door, open the door, open the door. And then somebody opened the door. And there was just an exodus. Everyone was jumping, moving towards the door, jumping out. And I remember jumping onto the wing with one of the kids and looking across, because there was the ground below. And I'm looking across at the R4 door where the slide had inflated, thinking, oh, should I try and jump over to the R4 slide and slide down? Because would that be feasible? And then I saw the hijacker who was at the R4 door, that corner. He went down the slide. And that just totally freaked me out. So now the hijackers are escaping the airplane. And here's all of us escaping the airplane, not knowing which direction to run in. It's dark outside. There's flashing lights from some cars. And we started following whoever was ahead of us. I remember getting into the airport terminal, and there were rows of those plastic bucket seats. And just as we entered, the lights went off, the power went off.
Yeah.
in the terminal. And so I remember going, all of us were under the seats because we didn't know what was happening. I'd just seen one of the hijackers getting off the airplane. I remember all of us were under the seats and the lights went off. When the lights finally came on, they had got that hijacker and they were walking him through the terminal with his hands tied behind his back with a rope.
With the rope. Yeah.
And that was, I don't know what to think. It was like, really, but yeah, it was scary. And then we got to the hospital. We were taken to the hospital and we stayed the night in the hospital for observation.
Shireen, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, after the firing had stopped, as everybody else just said, there was total pandemonium and panic and mayhem. Everybody was trying to get off the airplane. I looked for Neerja, but I didn't see. She was nowhere to be seen where she had been seated earlier. And so I looked towards the Clipper galley because I was right next to it. But I definitely didn't want to go there because I know that after firing their weapons, the two hijackers must be there. So I turned around and looked towards the aft of the airplane. I saw from the night sky outside, I realized that the R3 door was open. So that's where I walked towards. So I was walking towards that aisle, towards that door, and I could feel that there were dead people in the aisles, and I could feel the blood against my feet. It was really horrific and beyond description. So once I reached that particular door, R3, which I realized there was no slide. It had just been opened, and there were people on the wing. I jumped down. It's quite a drop from the door sill to the wing. And so I went halfway down the wing and I saw that there were people seated on the wing of the aircraft. Among those people, I saw Sunshine, Flight Attendant Dilip, and Rani. So I looked towards the aft of the airplane and I saw that the R4 slide, as Samira said, had been inflated. And so I thought that this is too high a jump for people to make from the wing without getting injured. So I decided to redirect the passengers down the inflated slide from the door, next door, the door R4. I ran back, I jumped up onto the door sill, and while I was running, I shouted again. This is where the Pan Am training just kicked in. I shouted, "Leave everything, come this way, leave everything, come this way." And then I jumped up and all the passengers followed. And I could see Sunshine and Dilip at the back there. And I was trying to pull people up and into the aircraft and direct them down to the next slide. While I was pulling people up and in, somebody handed me their bags. And I said, "Leave your bags." And Sunshine from the back was shouting, "Leave your bags," because people were trying to give us their luggage. And then as though it was not a normal boarding process, it was really terrible. So anyways, Sunshine, Dilip and Rani were trying to hold the passengers back from crowding back into the airplane to go down the aisle, down the other door. And at that moment, it was also terrible because I could feel that some people who I was pulling into the aircraft were really badly injured. But I really felt we didn't have any time. We had to get them off the airplane as soon as possible because in my mind, I was clear that the hijackers were still on board and they could open fire again. And the most scary part was that my back was towards the inside of the airplane. And if they came, I would be the first one to be shot, and I would be the last one to see them. Everybody on the wing could probably look in and see them, but I wouldn't. But anyway, I continued to pull them up and in, and the other flight attendants continued to hold them back. And what happened was what we were taught in training was to say to a helper, to identify a helper, an able-bodied helper, and say, "You stay here, help me." So what I did was I identified a nice young guy who I thought would be the perfect helper, who could stand there and help me pull people up and in. And I said to him, "You stay here, help me." And he just took a look at me, and then he ran off down the aisle to the other side and down the slide. I was so shocked. I didn't know what to do for a minute. I didn't want to ask anybody else because I had felt so disappointed by this person's reaction. So I just continued to stand there, pull people up and into the aircraft, and then down the aisle. There were little children. I actually remember throwing them onto the seats over there as well when they were handed to me. And finally, we got everybody into the airplane. And then the four of us started to look for people who were left behind, who needed help, who needed to exit the airplane from R4, who was still in the cabin. And that's when I saw Neerja being helped by Sunshine and Dilip towards the R4 door. We went there, and we shouted to one of the other flight attendants that Neerja was coming down the slide.
After the shooting and everybody running, people went on to the R3, and I followed them, and I went out on the wing and I stood back because a lot of people were jumping. There was no way we could get all of them back in. I didn't know what we were facing inside. There were enough grenades and smoke bombs that had been thrown. I didn't know what else was waiting, but I felt safer because I think I was out on the wing before Shireen got there. So I saw two hijackers jumping off onto the slide. So I knew two were gone, and I didn't think the others were going to wait behind, because right from the get-go, initially Mustafa had told me he had C4 around his waist, and he would blow up everyone if he didn't get his way. And if he intended, he should have blown everyone up if he really meant business. But they were such a bunch of cowards. If that's what they really intended to do, to martyr themselves, they would have blown themselves up, right? We wouldn't be here telling the story. So I was on the wing. People were jumping off. Whoever was jumping, I was letting them jump. There was one guy, Samira, just to let you know, who made it. He jumped from the wing to the slide, and he shot down like a bullet. Other people tried. Unfortunately, they weren't so fortunate. Some of them falling on their heads and not moving. It was terrible. The way some human behavior is, it disillusions you for life. Other people were jumping on top of them to get a soft landing. There were people with passenger bags. People were tripping over the bags and falling down. I was playing tug-of-war with the bags and the passengers. And Dilip was getting ready to jump. And he didn't know what was happening because he was kind of getting pushed off the plane because people were just mobbing the plane, and you're not geared to jump, but you were just being pushed off. So I grabbed Dilip and we stood aside, let everyone jump, whoever wanted to jump. And it reached a point where people were too old, and then they were pulling at my jacket, please, 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 help us, help us. So we went back towards the plane, and I stood at the bottom and I was pushing people up by their bums because it was like maybe a 2 foot, Shireen, would you say 2 foot?
Yeah.
Climb. And a lot of them that were left behind were really old. So I think Shireen were inside, and I didn't see Rani on the wing at all. I saw her afterwards when we were inside. It was so crowded. And I was pushing people up, Shireen heard me abuse a few passengers because they wouldn't leave their bags behind. And I was threatening them with a fist in front of their face, like, leave it. And this continued till the wing was empty, and then we got in. And Dilip was still with me. I didn't see Shireen at that point. And I saw Neerja get popped up, and she was staggering and walking down the left side of the aisle and holding her arm and her stomach. And she was staggering. So I told Dilip, I see Neerja, let's go, let's go. We ran up towards her, and then I couldn't find her because she had collapsed. And it was really dark now. The APU, everything, the emergency lights, everything was gone. And we carried her. I think I took the arms, and Dilip took the legs, and we carried her to R4 and pushed her down. While I was on the wing looking around, I saw a lot of guards sitting around, running around and doing all kinds of things. But basically, all they had were sticks, bamboo sticks. And that's what they came to help us out with. After we threw Neerja down the raft, that was the last I saw her alive. Dilip went next, I think, and then I took a running jump off the plane. And this is a funny. So, well, men in Karachi apparently do not touch other women. So I come shooting down the slide because I took a running jump. And our skirts were satin lined. So as I'm shooting down, my skirt is shooting up. And I hit the speed breaker at the end, and I put my arms out to be helped by these guys standing at the bottom. They were dressed in a Pathan something. Well, the minute they saw me coming bare to the waist practically, they turned around and turned their backs to me, and I hit the speed breaker, flew in the air and landed on all fours in the middle of the tarmac. I was so embarrassed. There was an ambulance there, and there was a guy really badly injured. I didn't turn back to look at the slide. I felt two people come down. I think it might have been Rani and Shireen. I don't know. And I helped get this guy into the ambulance. He was very, very badly injured. And we took off to the terminal.
I'll continue from there. After getting people into the airplane, and we were looking around for other people to send down the slide, I heard a cry from the rearmost section at the side of the galley at D&E zone. So there was a lady at the back of E zone, and she was crying out loudly for help, and she couldn't stand and walk, and I couldn't carry her. She was heavier than I was. So I hooked my arms from underneath her shoulders, and I dragged her across the floor and pulled her towards the galley, and then towards the door at R4, where I pushed her down into the slide and sent her down. Flight attendant Rani was also there, and there was another older man there at the door. We took him and pushed him also down the slide, walked around the cabin to see if there was anyone else there who needed our help. And at that point, flight attendant, it was the cabin was eerily silent. After having been so loud and noisy with all the cries of pain, it was suddenly just extremely silent. And Rani looked down the aisle at me, and she said, come on, Shireen, it's time to go. Jump, jump. So I really felt grateful to her at that moment for having called out to me and said my name. So I saw Rani jump, and about a minute or so later, I followed down the slide as well. To the best of my knowledge, I was the last person off the airplane. And we looked around, there was absolutely nobody there. So
no one moving.
No one was able to cry out or come forward to be evacuated. And then I reached the bottom of the slide, and I saw on the tarmac there was a man with an older man with a leg injury, and he was crying out in pain. And there was also a woman who said she had left her child behind. The man who had the injured leg, he said, "Don't leave me, stay with me, stay with me." So when the ambulance arrived, I got into the ambulance with him, and we went to the hospital. On the way there, he had a terrible injury, and I had to hold his leg for him. So his bone was sticking out. He was crying out in pain. And anyway, we reached the hospital, and the hospital was as chaotic as the airplane had been. There was no one there to help. There was people were just on the floor, and doctors were doing the best that could be done under the circumstances. And it was just they just were not prepared for all the passengers that were headed their way.
Bunch of idiots. They weren't even prepared with help for us. They had sticks, running around with stupid sticks and hiding behind us. It was just ridiculous. I don't get the news they put out there. Commandos stormed the plane. They did this, they did that. It was just disgusting. Just disgusting.
This is Madhvi to add to the hospital. Yes, I ended up in the hospital where I met up with Samira and other flight attendants. And yes, it was completely chaotic. I remember them telling me, "What happened to you?" And I told them my back and my leg hurts really bad. They said, "Okay, well, take an x-ray." They took an x-ray. Then they brought me a bunch of x-rays back and asked me to identify my x-ray. It was not even a picture. You're talking about an x-ray. I just didn't know what to answer. Anyway, they told me to sit down when the doctor would get a chance to come and meet me. In the meanwhile, another passenger, actually a paramedic came and said they had this one kid, and he had a bullet lodged in his brain, and they were looking for his parents, and they wanted to find his parents. If I spoke the South Indian language, I remember going into this ICU room, and the child was all wired up, and the only thing that I knew to ask in Tamil was, "What is your name?" And I attempted to ask this child what is his name. He was not replying. I tried in different languages. When I say different languages, I mean like Tamil, Hindi, English, Marathi, Gujarati, which were like the local Indian languages I knew. The kid was South Indian, from south of India, and spoke a different language. The only line I knew in the language was, "What is your name?" Basically, we wanted to find out what his name was so we could try to connect him with his parents. Not we, the authorities could. And it was completely unsuccessful, just adding to the chaos. And as we walked around, I remember seeing Marianne just lying there in pain. We didn't even know what each of us was suffering. We didn't know what was happening with us. We just knew we were in pain, whether we were in shock or whether we were in physical pain. We had to spend the whole night in the hospital. They wouldn't let us go. I remember Samira and me. Samira, I don't know if you recall, we asked if we could go join the crew back. They said, "No, we are there for evaluation." While we were sitting in benches for evaluation, just lined up on the floor for evaluation, until the following morning or few hours later, they rounded us, the few crew members that were there, and then took us to the hotel where the rest of the crew was. So I think about 4 or 5 of us were taken together and went and met up with the rest of the crew members, and all of us still had the bloody clothes. And up until we reached the hotel, I don't even think any of us realized how bloody our clothes were and what was going on with us, simply because we were so oblivious of everything that we had come through, just, I think, aware of the moment that we were alive, aware of the moment that we were breathing, aware of the moment that we were there. And so whatever we were wearing was so inconsequential till we arrived at the hotel. I remember them saying, oh, we'll take you down to the boutique and just pick up something that you can fit in. So, you can change in. And then, of course, they were going to have the interviews with FA and everybody else.
I'd just like to add a little bit. When we were in Karachi, when I was at the terminal, after the whole incident, we landed up at the terminal, and then they had captured 3 of the guys. 1 was injured. So they asked me to identify the hijackers because they pretended like they were the passengers. So I went and Dilip went, and they said, you won't be seen. And they pushed me into a room where 2 of them were there, and I identified them. And they took me to the truck, and where they had caught the 3rd person, the one that was tied by rope. And I identified him. And then they asked me to come to the hospital and identify the 4th hijacker. They took me to the morgue first. And as you enter the hospital, there was a line of shoes, bags, blood, all kinds of things just lined up in the morgue. They made me look at every dead person to see if one of the hijackers was them. And that's when I realized Neerja was dead. Then they took me up to the operation theater, while all my guys were sitting on benches and waiting for treatment. That son of a cockroach, Mustafa, was in an operating theater. And the police were with me. They took me into the operation, to the surgery unit. And the doctor comes and puts his hand against my shoulder and says, no, this is a sterile environment. So they got him on the bloody table before they got to my guys.
Well, I want to thank each of you for sharing your difficult stories. What a terrible incident. And if I may be so bold, Madhvi, Samira, Shireen, Sunshine, each of you are superheroes in my book, and you saved lives, and you should know that. And it's incredible talking to you, and each of you are incredible women. I'm in awe of what you've told me, and how many people each of you have saved in that terrible incident.
Thank you, Tom. That was very nice. Appreciate your thoughtfulness, truly.
I think I just want to say a few words about the trauma of the day to people who may be listening to this podcast and, have heard what we've had to say. What we went through was extremely traumatic, and but here's the ray of light. After so many years, we do still have our memories. They're still vivid and clear, but I want people to know time heals. And hopefully, if you stay connected with people, if you make the right efforts and moves, hopefully you can come through this and with time.
Well, thank each of you for your time. I know it's been a difficult topic to talk about. And thank you for sharing it with me, and also sharing it with our audience and the Pan Am Museum.
Just to add to, just on a side note about the hijacking itself. So this incident got over, but nothing came out of it in public or in recognition or acknowledgement until 20 years later. DOJ gave us an award, which is the highest victims award. Took 20 years for it to come to fruit. There were a few of us that got together that fought to get recognition. We fought to get a place in Arlington because Lockerbie had a spot. We fought to get a place for Pan Am 73, which did not fructify. but there were few of us after the hijacking, 5 of us, that really fought till the end, as far as we could take, to immemorialize the happening. And we continued fighting, and of course we are still fighting, because there were a lot of things that happened after that were not done right by the United States government, not done right. And this is not to politicize anything, just to continue the pain of anguish, where you go through something, you testify, you get, and you only go 20 years later to testify, because something else happens, it connects back, which 9/11 happens. It gives you then the platform to speak, which should have never taken that much time. And then after we do what we need to do and go through the pain and anguish of our experiences back and forth, and when it comes to fruit, they tell us that because we were not American citizens at the time of the hijacking, we do not get anything out of this, while anybody who was an American citizen gets it. I know it is irrelevant, but this was my battle after, and I spent hours, many hours, putting this whole thing together, which fruitified eventually to get the DOJ and recognition. Mm-hmm. And so I think just a small line of that is worth mentioning, that, mm-hmm. this is the fight that we came through. We continue to fight. We are still fighting. And in mm-hmm. spite of the fact that it's a fruitless fight, but we are still there, because we know what we went through. We know the lives we saved, as you can see what each one of us said and did. Mm-hmm. And yet to turn around and tell that just because you were not American citizens, you do not qualify for, anything out of this. But we did not do that. We did not differentiate being Indian, American, mm-hmm. Chinese, Japanese when we were saving lives. We were just doing our job and saving humanity. It was not doing your job. It was doing more than that. We were there to save lives, but the tables turned later. So I wanted to add that. Thank you for letting me do it.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said,
yes, just one last thing. This is Samira. I support what Madhuri just said. In 1986, all of us on Pan Am Flight 73 were young. We were in our early 20s. We were not world-wise per se. And in spite of that 16 hours of trauma and the trauma that followed later on, I still remember not being able to listen to fireworks for years later.
Yeah.
But we were disappointed that we were not given any recognition for that day because we were Indian flight attendants.
Thank you.
And I agree with everything that you just said. And like I said, each one of you are superheroes in my book, and you deserve all the recognition in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity to share our stories with you.
And thank you for your time. I very much appreciate it.
All right.